The vice president of our local bank was let out in handcuffs on a Tuesday morning, right past the drive-thru window where people were just trying to deposit their paychecks. He was wearing a navy suit, his head down, while two federal agents gripped his arms like he was a common street thief. This was a man who owned the biggest house in our small town, the guy everyone trusted with their life savings. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now because stories like this one, they get wild. And trust me, you're not going to believe where this goes. Stick around. I stood across the street, gripping my coffee cup so hard the plastic lid popped. "Is that Brenda's husband?" I whispered to my wife, Sarah. Sarah didn't look shocked. She looked satisfied. "I told you, Derek," she said, her voice cold as ice. "People who act that petty always have a skeleton in the closet. His just happened to be a federal crime." But this didn't start with a bank robbery. It started with a pair of silver pom-poms. And that's when I realized my wife knew something the rest of the town didn't. Before we keep going, do me a quick favor. Smash that subscribe button. I share stories about small-town drama and crazy revenge every single week. And trust me, the details of this bank scandal only get crazier from here. You definitely don't want to miss the twist. Anyway, back to the story. We lived in one of those small towns where the gossip travels faster than the speed of light. If you sneezed on Main Street, someone at the grocery store would offer you a tissue 10 minutes later. It was a place where everyone had a role to play. And my wife, Sarah, she was the town's tough but fair teacher. She'd been teaching middle school for a decade, and she didn't take any garbage from anyone. "It's a fishbowl, Derek," she used to say while grading papers at the kitchen table. "You can't hide who you really are in a place like this." The town looked perfect on the surface. Manicured lawns, white picket fences, and the local bank sitting right in the center of it all like a temple. Everyone looked up to people like Brenda and her husband. They were the golden family. They donated to the library, sat in the front row at church, and ran the local youth programs. But Sarah always had a feeling about them. She'd say, "The brighter the shine, the bigger the rust underneath." The rust Sarah talked about showed up first in Brenda's son, Leo. He was in Sarah's 8th grade history class, and from day one, he was a walking storm. He didn't just break the rules. He acted like they didn't apply to him. I remember Sarah coming home, her face tight with a kind of exhausted anger I only saw after a really bad day. "Leo hit another kid today," she said, dropping her keys on the counter with a sharp clink. Unprovoked, just walked up and swung because the other boy was sitting in his chair. I looked up from the stove. "Is the other kid okay?" "He's got a bruised lip, but the worst part is Brenda." Sarah pulled out a chair and sat down hard. I called her to report the suspension, and she didn't even ask if the other boy was all right. She just told me I was targeting her son because I was jealous of her family. "Jealous?" I laughed. "Of what? His detention record?" "She's convinced he's an angel," Sarah sighed. She told me, "My husband is the vice president of the bank, Sarah. We don't have behavioral issues in this family. Like a job title makes a kid stop punching people." Every grade level Leo had been through, it was the same story. Different teacher, same excuses. But Brenda didn't blame Leo. She blamed Sarah. Things finally boiled over at the local Piggly Wiggly. Sarah and I were just trying to grab some steaks for dinner when we turned the corner into the cereal aisle and ran right into Brenda. She was dressed like she was headed to a photo shoot. Perfect hair, expensive pearls, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She didn't say hello. She just blocked the aisle with her cart. I heard you gave Leo another 3-day suspension, Sarah, she said. Her voice was loud enough that the teenager stocking the shelves stopped to watch. He was bullying a 6th grader, Brenda, Sarah said, keeping her voice level. He was taking the kids' lunch money. I don't care who his father is. That's not allowed in my school. Brenda leaned in closer. I could smell her perfume, something floral and way too strong. It felt like it was trying to cover up something rotten. You're making a huge mistake, Brenda hissed. You think you're so untouchable because you have tenure. You're just a teacher. My husband practically owns this town. Sarah didn't blink. Then tell your husband to teach his son some manners. Brenda's face turned a blotchy, angry red. She looked at me, then back at Sarah, and a nasty little grin spread across her face. You know, your daughter is trying out for the cheer squad next week, isn't she? I'm the head of the selection committee this year. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Don't you dare bring my daughter into this. Brenda just patted her hair and pushed her cart past us. She looked over her shoulder and said, I'd hate for her to be disappointed. But then again, life is full of disappointments, isn't it? She walked away, laughing. I should have trusted my gut right then. Our daughter Chloe had been practicing her jumps in the backyard for weeks. She wasn't one of those kids who lived and breathed drama. She was a basketball player, a starter actually, with a solid jump shot and a high GPA. But in the 8th grade, all her friends were going out for the cheer squad. It was a rite of passage in our town. Dad, look! She shouted one afternoon, hitting a toe-touch jump that sent her ponytail flying. She landed with a thud on the grass, grinning ear to ear. Looking good, Chloe, I said, leaning against the porch railing. You excited for the tryouts? Everyone makes it, Dad, she said, wiping sweat from her forehead. Ms. Brenda said they need a big squad this year for the regional competition. The routines are just basic stuff, mostly just shaking palms and yelling, "Go team!" She was so bright, so sure of herself. She had no idea that her mother's dedication to her job had put a target on her back. I watched her practice, feeling a knot tighten in my chest. That Saturday, we drove to the sporting goods store to get Chloe's gear. Sarah was still worried about Brenda's threat, but she didn't want to ruin the moment. Chloe was beaming as she picked out the official practice shell, the specific bloomers, and a pair of brand-new, bone-white cheering shoes. These feel like clouds, Mom, Chloe said, bouncing in the aisle to test the springs. I looked at the price tag on the shoes alone, $85. By the time we added the heavy palms and the team bag, the total hit $150. In a teacher's household, that isn't exactly pocket change. Sarah swiped her card, the machine giving a happy little beep. You work hard at those practices, okay? This is an investment. I promise. Chloe hugged the box to her chest. The smell of new rubber and stiff polyester filled the car on the ride home. She looked so proud. Sarah caught my eye in the rearview mirror. She didn't say it, but I knew what she was thinking. Brenda wouldn't actually be that petty. No adult would take out a school grudge on a 13-year-old girl. We were wrong. The day of tryouts, the middle school gym smelled like a mix of floor wax and nervous energy. I dropped Chloe off at the side entrance. She was clutching her new gear bag, her hair pulled back so tight her eyes looked slanted. Good luck, kiddo, I said, giving her a fist bump. Thanks, Dad. I'll see you at 5. She jogged inside, her new white sneakers clicking against the linoleum. I spent the afternoon working in the garage, but I couldn't stop checking the clock. Sarah was even worse. She spent 3 hours aggressively weeding the garden. Every time I looked out the window, she was yanking dandelions like they'd personally insulted her. "Brenda's an adult, Sarah," I told her when she came in for water. "She knows the school board would have her head if she messed with the results." Sarah wiped dirt off her forehead. "You didn't see her face at the grocery store, Derek. That woman doesn't care about rules. She cares about winning." That's when I saw Chloe's silhouette through the front door glass. Chloe didn't run into the house. She walked, her shoulders were hunched, and she was still carrying her pom-poms in her hand instead of in her bag. The bright silver plastic crinkled loudly in the quiet living room as she stepped inside. Sarah dropped her gardening gloves on the rug. "Chloe, honey, how was it?" Chloe looked up, and my heart sank. Her eyes weren't red from crying. She looked more confused than anything. "I didn't make it," she whispered. Sarah froze. "What do you mean?" "Everyone makes the squad, Chloe. There are 24 spots." "Not this year." Chloe set her bag down on the floor. "Ms. Brenda stood in front of everyone and read the list. She called 23 names. Every single girl in the gym got a folder with the practice schedule, except me." "The only one?" I asked, stepping forward. "She cut the only girl who's a varsity-level athlete?" Chloe nodded slowly. "She told me my attitude didn't fit the team spirit. Then she asked me to leave so the real cheerleaders could start their first meeting." Sarah's face went from pale to a deep, dangerous purple. "She did it," Sarah hissed. "The crazy woman actually did it." Sarah didn't yell. That was the scary part. When Sarah gets loud, she's just venting. When she gets quiet, like she was now, it means she's moving into war mode. She walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up her phone, and scrolled through her contacts with a thumb that was pressing so hard on the screen I thought the glass might snap. "Sarah, wait," I said, reaching out. "Maybe we should talk to Brenda first. Find out what she actually said." Sarah looked at me, and for a second, I felt like one of her misbehaving students. "Talk to her? Derek, she just humiliated our daughter in front of her entire peer group to get back at me for doing my job. There's no more talking." "I'm fine, Mom," Chloe said, though she was picking at a loose thread on her new $150 uniform. "I can just play more basketball." "No," Sarah said, her voice vibrating with a low, steady heat. "You're not just doing anything. You earned that spot. This isn't about cheerleading anymore. This is about a bully with a clipboard." She hit the call button and put it on speaker. The dial tone echoed through the kitchen, sounding like a ticking bomb. "Who are you calling?" I whispered. "The principal," Sarah said. "And if he doesn't answer, I'm calling the superintendent. Brenda wanted to play small-town politics? Fine, let's play." Principal Miller answered on the third ring. "Sarah, everything okay? I was just heading out." "It will be when you fix what happened in your gym an hour ago," Sarah said. She didn't lead with small talk. She laid out the facts like a prosecutor. She told him about the $150 outfit, the no-cut policy for 8th grade cheer, and the fact that Chloe was the only girl standing on the sidewalk while the rest of the squad practiced. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of a chair creaking as Miller sat back down. "The only girl? Are you sure?" "My daughter is sitting right here, Phil. Brenda told her she didn't have the right attitude. We both know what that means. This is about Leo's suspension." "Sarah, listen." Miller's voice dropped. "Brenda's husband. He's the vice president at the bank. He's handled the school's athletic fund for years. I have to be careful how I handle this." "No," Sarah snapped, her hand tightening around a kitchen towel. You have to be careful how you handle me. Because if my daughter isn't on that list by tomorrow morning, I'm bringing my union rep, the local paper, and a lawyer to your office. This is professional retaliation against a teacher's child. Do you really want that headline in this town?" I watched Sarah's face. She wasn't bluffing. The air in the kitchen felt heavy. She was charged with the kind of energy you feel right before a lightning strike. "Let me call Brenda," Miller sighed. "Don't bother," Sarah said. "Just tell me if you're going to do your job, or if I need to do mine." The next morning, the school bell hadn't even finished ringing when the news broke. I was dropping Chloe off at the front circle, and for the first time in 24 hours, she didn't look like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from a friend already inside. "Dad," she said, her eyes wide. "Ms. Brenda is gone." "Gone?" I asked. "What do you mean, gone?" "She's not the coach anymore. Principal Miller sent an email to all the parents. He said there was a restructuring of the athletic department. They've got a new teacher taking over the squad." Sarah met us at the door of the school, a small, knowing smile on her face. She looked like she'd finally had a full night's sleep. "Chloe, go see Ms. Higgins in the gym. She has your folder waiting for you." As Chloe jogged off, I turned to Sarah. "That was fast. What did Miller say?" "He didn't have to say much," Sarah whispered, leaning against the cold brick wall of the entryway. "Brenda tried to scream about her husband's influence, but Miller reminded her that the school board hates a lawsuit more than they love the bank. She was out by 8 o'clock last night." I looked down the hallway and saw Brenda. She was slamming her locker shut, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She caught Sarah's eye and mouthed one word: "Watch." For the next 2 weeks, the town felt like a pressure cooker. Chloe was back on the squad, shaking her palms and hitting every mark, but the atmosphere at the games was off. Brenda didn't disappear. She sat in the top row of the bleachers at every single basketball game and cheer competition, dressed in her designer coats, just watching Sarah. She didn't cheer for the team. She didn't talk to the other moms. She just stared, her eyes tracking Sarah's every move like a hawk. "It's creepy, Derek," Sarah muttered one Friday night as we walked to the car. The wind was biting, smelling of wet asphalt and old popcorn. She follows me to the grocery store. She parks her SUV at the end of our block. She's waiting for me to trip up. I glanced toward the street. Brenda's black Cadillac was idling near the exit, its headlights cutting through the dark like two cold, white eyes. "She lost her power," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "This is all she has left. Petty glares." I was wrong. Brenda wasn't the one Sarah needed to worry about. The real storm was brewing inside that big house on the hill, and it was about to wash away everything Brenda thought she owned. The first cracks didn't show up at the school. They showed up at the bank. Our town was small enough that if the local branch manager looked a little too stressed while drinking his morning latte, people noticed. And lately, the atmosphere at the First National was heavy. "I went to deposit my paycheck today," Sarah said, stirring a pot of pasta. The steam curled around her face, but she wasn't looking at the food. The tellers were whispering. Everyone looked like they'd seen a ghost. I cracked a beer. "Maybe they're just busy. It's tax season." "No," Sarah shook her head. "I saw Brenda's husband, Gary. He was in his glass office yelling at someone on the phone. He looked terrible, Derek. Sweat stains on his shirt, tie pulled loose. This is the man who usually looks like he stepped out of a magazine." I shrugged it off. I figured Gary was just stressed about his angel son's behavior. I didn't realize that the stress was actually the sound of a multi-million-dollar lie finally starting to snap. A few days later, the whispers turned into a low roar. I stopped by the local hardware store to pick up some salt for the driveway, and the old men who usually argued about football were huddled in a tight circle by the registers. They weren't talking about the game. "Audit," I heard one of them mutter. The word hung in the air, heavy and sharp. "State police were there this morning," another added, his voice low. "Checking the books. Gary hasn't been out of that office in 36 hours. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. In a town like ours, audit was a four-letter word. It meant the Golden family wasn't just losing their social standing, they were losing their safety net. When I got home, Sarah was already by the window, watching Brenda's Cadillac speed past our house. Brenda was driving, her hands gripped so tight on the wheel her knuckles were white. She didn't look like a woman who was winning anymore. She looked like she was drowning. The explosion didn't happen with a bang. It happened with a siren. It was a Tuesday, just after 10 in the morning. I was at work when my phone started blowing up with texts. "Are you seeing this? Gary, the bank, right now." I made an excuse to my boss and drove straight to Main Street. The scene looked like something out of a movie. 3 black SUVs were parked haphazardly on the sidewalk in front of First National. 2 men in windbreakers with FBI in bold yellow letters on the back were escorting Gary out the front doors. He didn't have his blazer on. His expensive silk tie was crumpled in his hand, and he was stumbling like he'd been drinking. But it wasn't alcohol. It was the look of a man who knew his life was over. "Gary!" Brenda's voice pierced through the crowd. She was standing by the ATM, her face twisted in a mask of pure terror. "Gary, tell them it's a mistake!" He didn't even look at her. He just stared at the pavement as they pushed him into the back of the SUV. Just the local news didn't just report an arrest. They opened a floodgate. By 5 o'clock, the audit rumors were replaced by the cold, hard facts of the indictment. Gary hadn't just made a mistake with the books. He'd been systematically draining the bank's largest commercial accounts for nearly 5 years. $700,000, Sarah whispered, staring at the television screen in our living room. The blue light from the news report made her face look ghostly. He was using the bank's money like a personal piggy bank. "But for what?" I asked. They already had the big house and the fancy cars. The news anchor answered for us. Gary wasn't just an embezzler. He was a regular at a high-end pharmacy in the city. And I'm not talking about CVS. He had a massive habit, and apparently, Haiti, a 22-year-old girlfriend he was putting through college in the next county over. Sarah leaned back, the remote clicking against the coffee table. All those times Brenda looked down on us. Her husband was paying for a mistress with stolen money. The next morning, the town's Golden family was the only thing anyone could talk about. I stopped at the diner for a coffee, and the air was thick with the smell of fried bacon and the sharp tang of judgment. The same people who used to kiss Gary's ring were now tearing him apart over their eggs. A mistress? Half his age? The waitress scoffed, slamming a mug down on the counter, while his wife was out here acting like the Queen of England. Disgusting. I sat in the corner, watching the rain streak against the window. It felt like the whole town was being washed clean of a lie we'd all been told for years. Sarah called me from school during her lunch break. Her voice was quiet. "Brenda showed up at the school today, Derek. Not to coach. She was cleaning out Leo's locker. No one would even look at her. They all just stepped aside, like she had the plague." "The mighty have fallen," I said. It's not even that, Sarah sighed. She looked smaller, like the pearls were the only thing holding her up. Hold on. Pause for a second. If you were Sarah, would you feel sorry for Brenda? Or would you consider this the ultimate karma? Seriously, drop a comment below because I want to know if I'm crazy for thinking she deserved this. Also, if you're enjoying the drama, hit that like button. It really helps the channel. All right, back to the chaos. Within a week, the bank VP lifestyle vanished like a dream. The big house on the hill, the one Brenda used to brag about at every PTA meeting, now had a bright orange seized notice taped to the front door. The black Cadillac she'd used to intimidate Sarah was gone, replaced by a rusted-out sedan that sounded like it was coughing up gravel every time it turned a corner. I saw Brenda at the post office about 10 days after the arrest. She wasn't wearing the pearls anymore. She was wearing an oversized sweatshirt and leggings, her hair pulled back in a messy knot that looked like it hadn't been brushed in days. She was staring at a stack of envelopes, probably bills, with a look of pure, hollowed-out shock. "She looks like a ghost, Derek," Sarah said that night. We were sitting on our porch, the air smelling of cut grass and wood smoke. I saw her in the school office today. She was trying to get a refund on Leo's field trip deposit. $50. She was practically begging for it. $50? I asked. A month ago, she wouldn't have picked a $50 bill up off the street if it was wet. "It's all gone," Sarah whispered. "Gary didn't just spend the bank's money. He spent theirs too. Every savings account, every college fund. He gambled it all on that life and that girl. It was the ultimate fall from grace." But as Sarah watched Brenda struggle to put her groceries in that beat-up car, the anger in her eyes started to melt into something else. Something I didn't expect. The rain was coming down in gray, freezing sheets when Sarah pulled into the grocery store parking lot. She wasn't looking for trouble. She just needed milk. But there, standing under the flickering neon sign of the store entrance, was Brenda. She didn't have an umbrella. She was just standing there, clutching a single brown paper bag that was slowly turning into mush in the downpour. Sarah stopped. She could have kept walking. Most people in town did. They treated Brenda like she was contagious, like Gary's crimes were something you could catch if you stood too close. "Brenda!" Sarah called out. Brenda flinched. She looked at Sarah, and for the first time, the fire was completely gone. Her eyes were sunken, surrounded by dark circles that no amount of expensive cream could hide now. "I'm waiting for my ride," she said, her voice thin and shaking. "The bus doesn't run for another 40 minutes, Sarah said, looking at the empty street. "And that bag is going to break. Get in the car." "I don't need your help, Sarah." Brenda tried to pull her shoulders back, to find that old bank VP wife posture, but she just looked tired. A cold shiver racked her body. "I'm not asking," Sarah said, opening the passenger door. "Get in. It's freezing." Brenda stood there for a long beat, the rain dripping off her nose. Then, with a heavy, defeated sigh, she climbed in. The car smelled like damp wool and Sarah's vanilla car air freshener. The silence was deafening. Sarah kept her eyes on the road, the windshield wipers thumping a steady, rhythmic beat against the glass. Brenda sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her hands buried in the pockets of her soaked sweatshirt. She looked like she was trying to disappear into the upholstery. "I didn't know. Sarah." The voice was so quiet Sarah almost missed it over the sound of the heater. "I didn't know about the money. I didn't know about her." Brenda's voice cracked on the last word. She pulled a hand out of her pocket, and Sarah noticed her wedding ring was gone. Just a pale, thin circle of skin where the diamond used to sit. He told me he was working late. He told me the bonuses were just that good. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. We all wanted to believe the best, Sarah said, her voice softening. No. Brenda shook her head, a single tear tracking through the damp grit on her cheek. I was a monster to you. I was a monster to everyone because I thought I had to be. I thought that if I wasn't the best, if my family wasn't perfect, then Gary wouldn't stay. She let out a dry, jagged sob. I cut your daughter because I was jealous. I was jealous that your life was real, and I was starting to realize mine was made of cardboard. Sarah pulled the car to the curb. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was just sad. Sarah sat there with her hands still on the steering wheel, looking at Brenda's profile against the rain-streaked window. This was the woman who had tried to derail her career and break her daughter's spirit. But as a teacher, Sarah had spent years looking at the why behind every what. My wife says this explains Leo's behavior issues, I remember Sarah telling me later that night. She wasn't making excuses for the kid. She was just seeing the puzzle pieces finally click into place. Sarah looked at Brenda. You were living in a war zone, Brenda. No one can keep up a front like that forever without something breaking. For you, it was the pearls. For Leo, it was his fists. He's not a bad boy, Brenda whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the car's engine. He's so confused. I know, Sarah said. She reached over and placed her hand on Brenda's arm. The sweatshirt was ice cold. Kids aren't blind. He saw his dad disappearing. He saw you drowning in perfection. He didn't have words for it, so he hid things. Brenda finally looked at her. For the first time, she didn't look like a coach or a VP's wife. She just looked like a mother who had failed, and she knew it. The big house on the hill was sold at auction 3 weeks later. I drove by it once and saw men in moving overalls hauling out the Italian leather sofa and the grand piano Brenda used to play during her charity mixers. They loaded the remains of Gary's stolen life into the back of a generic white truck, while a small crowd of neighbors watched from the sidewalk. It felt like a funeral for a person nobody actually liked. Brenda and Leo moved into a 2-bedroom apartment above the laundromat on the edge of town. The air there always smelled like industrial detergent and burnt dryer lint, a far cry from the vanilla-scented candles of her old life. I saw them today, Chloe said one afternoon, dropping her basketball on the porch. Her face was thoughtful. Leo was sitting on the curb, waiting for the bus. He looked, quiet. He didn't even try to trip me when I walked past. Maybe the quiet is what he needed, I said. Sarah spent her Saturdays helping Brenda navigate the paperwork for state assistance. It was a bizarre sight. The woman who had been cut from the squad and the woman who had cut her, sitting at our kitchen table surrounded by tax forms and food stamp applications. She has nothing, Derek, Sarah told me after one session. Gary didn't just have a mistress. He had a debt that went back years. Brenda's name was on the second mortgage he took out to pay for the girls' tuition. The local paper finally printed the photos from the court filings, and that's when the town really lost its mind. The mistress wasn't just some random girl Gary had met at a bar in the city. She was a 22-year-old dental student named Tiffany, who Gary had met when she was an intern at the very bank he was robbing. I looked at the photos over Sarah's shoulder. Tiffany was all blonde highlights, spray tans, and designer sunglasses, the kind that cost $300 a pair. In one picture, she was leaning against a brand new convertible, a graduation gift from Gary. while holding a shopping bag from a store I couldn't even afford to walk into. "Look at the date on this one," Sarah said, pointing her finger at a photo of Gary and Tiffany on a beach in Cabo. "This was during spring break last year. Gary told Brenda he was at a risk management seminar in Chicago. While Brenda was home with Leo, dealing with his suspensions," I added, feeling a wave of nausea. The worst part was the jewelry. Gary had bought Tiffany a diamond necklace that matched the one he'd given Brenda for their 10th anniversary. Exactly the same. It was like he didn't even have the imagination to lie well. He just bought two of everything with other people's money. One for the perfect wife, and one for the secret life. The legal hammer didn't just fall on Gary. It swung back toward the person he'd left behind. It was a Tuesday evening, almost exactly 6 months since the first arrest, when Sarah's phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was Brenda. Her voice didn't sound like the broken, quiet woman we'd come to know. It sounded like someone who had just seen a ghost. "They're taking him, Sarah," she choked out. "They're taking Leo." Sarah stood up so fast her chair screeched against the hardwood. "What are you talking about? Who is taking him?" "Child Protective Services. Gary's lawyer. That snake. He filed a motion. He's trying to claim I'm an unfit mother to reduce his own sentencing. He's telling the court that I knew about the money all along and that I'm the one who fostered Leo's violent environment." I watched Sarah's face go through 3 different emotions in 5 seconds. Shock, disbelief, and finally, a cold, predatory rage. He's blaming the wife he robbed to get a lighter sentence for his mistress and his drugs? "He has records, Sarah," Brenda sobbed. The sound was raw, like metal scraping on pavement. "He's using the school reports. Every time Leo got suspended, Gary kept the letters. He's presenting them as evidence that I'm a negligent parent." Sarah grabbed her keys. "Where are you?" "The apartment. They're here now." We were in the car before the call ended. As I drove, Sarah was a blur of motion, pulling documents from her school bag. "That coward," she hissed. "He thinks he can use my own disciplinary reports as a weapon to steal a kid from the only parent he has left." When we arrived at the apartment above the laundromat, the scene was chaos. A white government-issued sedan was idling at the curb, its lights casting a sterile glow over the cracked pavement. A woman in a sharp blazer was standing in the doorway, a clipboard in her hand. Brenda was on the stairs, clutching Leo's arm, while the boy stood there frozen, his face a mask of terrifying silence. Sarah didn't wait for the car to fully stop. She jumped out and marched toward the social worker. "Can I help you, ma'am?" the woman asked, her voice professional and cold. "I'm Sarah Miller. I'm Leo's teacher," Sarah said. She didn't look like a suburban mom. She looked like a force of nature. "And I'm here to tell you that every single report in that file was written by me, and not one of them points to that mother." The social worker looked at the paperwork. "Mr. Miller's counsel suggests—" "Mr. Miller's counsel is a liar representing a thief," Sarah snapped. "I have the daily logs. I have the records of every phone call I made to this home. Brenda was the only one who ever answered. Brenda was the only one who showed up for meetings. Gary Miller didn't even know what grade his son was in." She stepped closer, her shadow falling over the clipboard. "If you take this child based on the testimony of a man who stole $700,000 from this town, I will be the first person on the stand at your oversight hearing. Do we understand each other?" The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the smell of laundry soap and the hum of the white sedan. The social worker didn't move for a long time. She looked from Sarah's fierce, unwavering gaze to the terrified boy on the stairs, then back down at her clipboard. The silence was only broken by the rhythmic thump-thump of a heavy-duty washer in the laundromat below us. "I'll need copies of those logs, Mrs. Miller," the woman finally said, her voice losing its icy edge. "And a formal statement from the school. Until I review the primary source of these behavioral reports, the removal order is on hold. But I'm filing a high-priority update." Brenda let out a sound that wasn't quite a breath and wasn't quite a scream. She collapsed onto the wooden steps, pulling Leo into her lap. The boy didn't pull away this time. He buried his face in her sweatshirt, his shoulders finally shaking with the weight of it all. Sarah didn't celebrate. She just stood there on the cracked pavement, watching the white government sedan pull away into the dark. "They're gone for now, Brenda," Sarah said, walking up the stairs. She sat down on the step below them, ignoring the grit and the cold. "Why?" Brenda looked up, her face a wreck of tears and smeared mascara. "After everything I did to Chloe, after I tried to get you fired, why would you save me?" Sarah looked at Leo, then back at the woman who used to be her greatest enemy. "Because Gary thinks everyone is as disposable as the money he stole. He thinks he can trade his family for a shorter sentence. So I'm a teacher, Brenda. I don't let bullies win. Not in my classroom. And definitely not on my watch." The courthouse was a brick building that had stood since the 1920s, but the air inside felt like it was from a different century. It smelled of old wood, floor wax, and the collective sweat of a town that had come to watch its golden boy answer for his sins. Sarah and I sat in the third row, right behind Brenda. Gary was let in through a side door. He wasn't wearing his navy suit or his silk tie. He was in an orange jumpsuit that made his skin look sickly and yellow. When he saw Brenda, he didn't look remorseful. He looked annoyed, like she was an inconvenience he'd forgotten to clear off his schedule. "He's going to testify," Brenda whispered, her knuckles white as she gripped her purse. "His lawyer said he's going to tell the judge I spent the money." "Let him," Sarah said. She was holding a manila envelope, the school logs and the disciplinary records Gary had tried to weaponize. Liars always think they're the smartest person in the room until they meet someone who kept the receipts. When Gary took the stand, he looked directly at the judge. "I did it for my family," he lied. "My wife's spending, her demands. I was just trying to keep us afloat." The room went cold. It was the ultimate gaslight. The prosecutor didn't look impressed by Gary's performance. He stood up slowly, a stack of papers in his hand, the same ones Sarah had meticulously organized. "Mr. Miller, you claim you embezzled nearly $1 million to satisfy your wife's demands. Yet, I have here the school attendance records for your son, Leo." Gary blinked, his smug expression faltering. "What does that have to do with—" "It has everything to do with where you were," the prosecutor snapped. "While your wife was attending every parent-teacher conference, every disciplinary hearing, and every football game, our records show you were in the city. In fact, bank records show you were checking into a boutique hotel with a Miss Tiffany Vance on the very nights you claimed to be working overtime to pay for Brenda's lifestyle." A low murmur rippled through the gallery like a wave hitting the shore. Brenda sat perfectly still, her head held high, watching the man she'd loved crumble in real time. "The school logs from Sarah Miller," the prosecutor continued, "show that you never once answered a call regarding your son's welfare. You weren't a provider, Mr. Miller. You were a ghost." Gary looked at Sarah. If looks could kill, the courtroom would have been a crime scene. But Sarah didn't flinch. She just stared back, the underdog teacher finally holding the person in power accountable. The judge didn't even take an hour to deliberate. When he returned to the bench, the sound of his gavel was like a thunderclap in the silent courtroom. Gary stood there, his shoulders slumped for the first time, the reality of his situation finally sinking through the layers of his arrogance. "Mr. Miller," the judge began, his voice echoing off the high ceilings, "you didn't just steal from a bank. You stole from your community, your neighbors, and most egregiously, you tried to steal the future of your own child to save your skin. The court finds your testimony not only fraudulent, but repulsive." The sentence was 12 years in a federal facility. No parole, no early out for good behavior. As the bailiffs moved in to lead him away, Gary turned toward Brenda. For a split second, I saw a flash of the man he used to be, the one who thought he could talk his way out of anything. He opened his mouth to say something, but Brenda didn't give him the chance. She simply looked away, turning her back to him as she reached out to squeeze Sarah's hand. The clink of the handcuffs was the last thing we heard as the side door shut. Outside on the courthouse steps, the sun was finally breaking through the gray clouds. The air smelled like rain and fresh asphalt. Brenda took a deep breath, the first one in months that didn't look like it hurt. "What now?" she asked, looking at the quiet street. "Now," Sarah said, "we go get the kids, and we go home." The middle school gym was loud, but for the first time, the noise didn't feel like a threat. It was the night of the regional cheer finals. I sat in the bleachers next to Sarah, who was busy grading papers between sets. Down on the floor, the squad was a blur of blue and gold. Chloe was front and center, her ponytail whipping as she nailed a back handspring that brought the crowd to their feet. But the biggest surprise wasn't my daughter. It was the woman standing on the sidelines with the clipboard. Brenda wasn't the head coach. The school district had rules about that, but she was the lead volunteer. She was wearing a simple team sweatshirt and jeans, her hair short and sensible. There were no pearls. Instead of barking orders, she was leaning in, she whispering a word of encouragement to a girl who looked nervous. "She's good at it," I whispered to Sarah. "She's honest at it," Sarah corrected, not looking up from a red-penned essay. That's the difference. After the routine, Leo met us in the lobby. He was wearing his junior varsity basketball jersey, his height finally catching up to his hands. He gave Chloe a high five, a genuine, awkward teenager high five, and then looked at Sarah. "Thanks for the extra credit help, Mrs. Miller," he said, shifting his weight. "I made the honor roll." "I know, Leo," Sarah smiled. "I'm the one who posted the list." As we walked to the parking lot, I saw Brenda's old sedan. It was still beat up, but it was clean. The golden family was gone, replaced by something much harder to build, a real life.